So that kind of brings us to the next topic of discussion, which you see everywhere, which is why does the U.S., the narrative goes, have such a bad problem with mass shootings and school shootings? This doesn't happen anywhere else, where the gun and mass shooting capital of the world is the narrative. And I have a couple problems with this. But one of my problems with saying this only happens in America is that mass killings happen in many other countries just with different weapons or tools. Sometimes, yes, guns. But for example, a madman in London blew up and killed dozens of people at an Ariana Grande concert. In Paris, they had more than 70 people killed by somebody behind the wheel of a 16-wheeler who went and mowed down civilians. So it's like the root of this sickness is not guns. And you can't say we're less safe just because there are more guns here, when mass killings and homicide data are what we really need to look at, not just shootings, because a gun is just a tool. The flip side, too, is we can't change it, right? We have almost 400 million guns in America. It's not like we could start over tomorrow from scratch and have no guns. Like, we could never copy some of these, like Sweden or Norway or the countries they might point to. We couldn't copy them if we wanted to. Right? We're starting at a different point than them. So I get really frustrated by the international comparisons because they always seem to me pretty detached and unrealistic. But Hannah, I know that you also have run the numbers on some of this and say that that narrative is overblown to begin with.
Yeah, I love that you point this out because it is bogus. I mean, first and foremost, just trying to compare the USA, which has 330 million people, 50 states and multiple territories, to like Italy. Like some of these places have the population of some of our smaller states like South Carolina or Rhode Island. And so trying to like make apples to apples comparisons between USA data and their data makes absolutely no sense, first and foremost. But secondarily, as you already pointed out, that does not mean that they have lower rates of violence, which is, again, all we should actually care about. I don't care if I get shot to death or mowed down by a car. I care that I don't get killed in some kind of mass casualty killing out in the general world. So that's where we should be focusing our attention on. But when it comes to these stats, oh my gosh, the gaslighting this week. Logan showed me a graph he saw that was like, had all these countries, including Mexico, where it was like 0 mass shootings. And then had like the USA had all these mass shootings. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, they have the audacity to say Mexico hasn't had a mass shooting this year, like with all the like gang violence going on down there. Like what? But people just post this stuff and then other people regurgitate it and share it and they never look into it. So couple years ago, I got hype on this and I made an entire episode of the OG base series on gun control. You can go back and watch it on YouTube or listen on the audio platform. I also transitioned it. Yeah, we'll link. I also made it into an article at base-politics.com if you want to go read this comprehensively. But I want to go over some key statistics that are important that you know. First and foremost, the mass shootings account for only 2% of annual gun deaths in the U.S. And I want to be clear that when they say they make up for only 2% of annual gun deaths, the calculations that they use to even quantify what is a mass shooting is kind of fuzzy. Because when you and I think of a mass shooting, we think of a school shooter, we think of the Buffalo shooter a couple weeks ago. They count any incident where there are 4 deaths by gun. And so that could be... So like gang stuff or drive-bys as well? Yep, it could be a murder-suicide in the family. It could be gangs. That is the only quantifier they use for most sets of data to quantify a mass shooting is 4 people died. And even then, even with that very fuzzy kind of statistic, it still makes up for only 2% of shooting deaths in the U.S. The other thing I should know is that the U.S. makes up 1.49% of murders by firearm worldwide. They make up 2.2% of the attacks by firearm and less than 1.15% of the mass public shooters. All of these statistics are much less than America's 4.6% share of the world population. So we are hardly this like war-torn gun violent state. And in fact, there's other things that indicate we're doing better than other countries. Of the 97 countries where they've identified mass public shootings, the U.S. actually ranks 64th per capita in its rate of attacks and 65th in fatalities. According to the Crime Prevention Research Center, the frequency of foreign mass public shootings since 1998 has grown 291% faster in other countries than it has in the U.S. So there's some significant pushback, I think, that we should be hanging our hat on in there.
But let me ask you about this, though, because these numbers are so different. And we'll put a link to your source there, the Crime Research Prevention Center, but they're so different from the numbers you'll see elsewhere from other groups and other orgs and in mainstream media. How is it possible to get such wildly different facts and figures and data on an issue like this?
Yeah, that's the right question. And I often tell people I'm a data person. I love data, but you can never just look at one set of data because data too can be manipulated. Researchers have their own bias, and there's ways that you can make sure you kind of get the numbers you want. So I'll give a couple examples of this. And to be clear, Crime Prevention Research Center is pro Second Amendment. They have a pro gun kind of bias, whereas a lot of these other groups like Everytown, they're anti-gun. And so what you kind of have to do cumulatively is look at all of the data and look at how they're each achieving those numbers and figure out like which set of data actually makes the most sense. So for example, if you look at Crime Prevention Research Center, when they count mass shootings and they're looking at things like the rate of shootings at schools, they're using the actual, what I think should be definition of a mass shooting, right? Like a single lone gunman coming in, killing multiple people unknown to them in a public arena. Whereas places like Everytown would just say any incident that had more than 4 people hurt or killed at it is a mass shooting. So those kind of get very fungible. Another example is, and I think we actually have this in here. I'll go ahead and skip to it. But we found that 86% of mass public shootings took place in gun-free zones from 2009 to 2016. That is also research from the Crime Prevention Research Center that the Washington Post posted, but it conflicts drastically with Everytown's research, where they try to say like less than 10%, I think. And the reason they get that number is they exclude any school where a police officer might be. And so they technically say it's not a gun-free zone if there's a school resource officer or police officer there, and they don't count those. And so this is what I mean, like shady stuff, right? And so you can go in and look at how they're calculating and decide. But for me, Crime Research Prevention Center uses much more fair data and is much more transparent about their practices and how they're getting their data than some of these other groups. And when you look at Everytown, even just that with gun-free zones, it is so intentionally trying to mislead people about the realities of where these incidents occur, especially when you consider the fact that having a resource officer, a police officer there does not even mean they have to intervene on your behalf to act. It's still a gun-free zone. Like, it should absolutely be counted in those statistics. So that's some of what's going on behind the scenes there.
Yeah. I mean, and I see the same thing all the time with like headlines. Like there have been 25 mass shootings in 2022 already. I keep seeing that everywhere and media is parroting that. And when you look into that at first glance, I mean, when we hear school shooting, we picture Uvalde, we picture Columbine, we picture Parkland. But the way they get such a high number, it's like, have you heard about 25 in 2022? No, and you would have if that actually happened. They count like a gun discharging in the parking lot as a school shooting. Or, a kid brings a gun to school and there's a gang shootout or something and a person is killed. That's a school shooting. And like under the literal definition of the word, I guess they're right. But they're using a definition that is so wildly different than the public understanding of that term that I think it's incredibly misleading and it just serves to scare people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It is meant to scare people, and it's problematic because it prevents us from, again, having the conversations we need to have about how do we actually keep people safe? What are the things we need to do? And when you're trying to misconstrue the data, it really ends up giving you really bad ideas and approaches. So I think that's what's been happening here. And on top of all of this, these people really never seem to take into account just how many people are saved by guns every year, right? Every time you're trying to tweak with this and say, like, we want to do something to, like, get rid of guns, you have to look at the unseen side effects of that too, which is the hundreds of thousands of people who save their own lives every year thanks to guns. We have one statistic that shows 162,000 cases per year where someone almost certainly would have been killed if they had not used a gun for protection. Another estimate shows that Americans use guns in self-defense between 500,000 to 3 million times a year. And so these are really serious things that we have to take into account when we're setting public policy. And I think they get lost in the shuffle.